For centuries, we've been taught the fall that never happened, that Adam sinned in the garden and humanity fell. But the Bible never says that, not even once. We actually put that there. In fact, for more than 4,000 years, from Adam to Paul, through the rabbis and the sages, nobody ever called what happened in Eden the fall. Or neither did they ever call Adam's act sin. I know. Many of you will disagree with me on this and say, I must not have ever read Romans chapter 5. But when you actually read Romans 5 and set it beside Genesis 4, you'll realize you've misunderstood Paul's entire framework. This is what I call reading the Bible horizontally. Not verse against the verse, but verse alongside verse until the full picture comes into view. And what you'll find is Adam eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil wasn't the fall into sin you've been taught. It was the act that attracted sin to the door. Cain was the one who opened it and let sin in. Stay with me. Don't click away just yet. Let's step in to Eden. Adam and Eve are placed in the garden, God's garden, a place of beauty and abundance. And notice this. They're not given a scroll full of laws. They're given a voice, God's very own voice. Watch this. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 16, it says, and the Lord God commanded the man. The Hebrew word there is savah. It means an urging, a direction. But get this, in Hebrew thought, it doesn't mean what we think. To respond isn't to obey in the Roman sense. It's to Shema, to hear God's voice, internalize it, and align your life with it. So the real test in Eden wasn't about a piece of fruit. It was about whose voice Adam and Eve would Shema, whose voice they would listen to. Eve gave her ear to the serpent's voice, not God's. Adam gave his ear to Eve's voice, not God's. See the pattern? Both failed to Shema. They listened to the wrong voice. And here's the twist. Most people miss. Genesis 3 never calls Adam and Eve's act sin. The Hebrew word chay, sin, doesn't appear in the story given in Genesis 3 at all. In fact, there isn't even a Hebrew word for fall anywhere in Genesis 3. You won't find nafal, to fall, or any of the related words like kashal, to stumble, or moat, to slip, shake, fall down. The Bible doesn't call Eden a fall. That idea was actually inserted centuries later in Latin by the church fathers. What the Bible does call Adam's act is found in the New Testament. And it's there called a transgression. In Hebrew, that's a Pesha. In Greek, that's a parabasis. What it's telling us is that Adam crossed God's boundary. And here's what's remarkable. The ancient Hebrew picture of Pesha reveals this very act itself. Pesha, pe, the mouth, shin, the two front teeth, to consume, ayin, the eye, to see, to know, to experience. In other words, to open the eyes. Did you catch it? That's the Eden story. They opened their mouths to consume the fruit. And because of it, their eyes were opened to a fusion of good and bad ideas they were never meant to know. When Romans 5 says Adam transgressed, the very letters of Pesha paint the scene of him eating the fruit. Not sin, not a failure, not to fall, but a failure to Shema, to listen, to trust, and act on God's voice and that voice alone. This is the first moment humanity gave its ear to a voice, to the wrong voice. And you only see that when you read the Bible horizontally, setting Genesis 3 beside Genesis 4 and Romans 5. Because the first time the Bible ever uses the word sin, it isn't with Adam. It's with Cain. After Eden, the story zooms in on Adam's sons, Cain and Abel. They bring offerings unto God, and God's full gaze was upon Abel's offering. But he had not respect that same gaze for Cain's. Because of this, Cain grew angry. And just like in Eden, God's voice comes to Cain and speaks to him, forewarning Cain, just as God did with his father Adam. He forewarned him of death if eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But this time a new issue is crystal clear. God forewarns Cain of something Adam, Cain's father, never heard of: the presence of sin. Genesis 4, verse 7. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire. The Bible is making something explicitly evident. This is almost exactly what was stated to Eve in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. And thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Coincidence? No. But there it is. The first appearance of sin in the Bible. Not in Eden, not to Adam, not to Eve, but with Cain. Sin is pictured as crouching at the door. God warns him, you can master this. Don't open the door. But Cain doesn't hearken, Shema, unto God's voice. He answers the knock, opens the door, and murders his brother Abel. So here's the horizontal truth. Adam transgressed and attracted sin to the door of this world. Cain was the one who actually let sin in. Now hold that picture side by side with Romans 5. This is where horizontal reading changes everything. Romans chapter 5, verse 12 says, wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. If you read that verse in isolation, it should look like Paul is contradicting Genesis. But when you read it horizontally, Genesis and Revelation, they start to harmonize. Adam's transgression didn't equal sin. His transgression brought about mortality into the human condition and attracted sin to the door. But it was Cain who opened that door, let sin in, and ultimately resulted in killing his brother Abel. It's the first recorded death in the Bible. So Paul isn't rewriting Genesis. He's actually amplifying it. Adam transgressed, Cain sinned, But watch this. Christ shut the door. This is the power of reading the Bible horizontally. So how do we end up with this idea of the fall? Why do so many Christians talk about Adam as if he committed the first sin? Well, contrary to popular belief, the answer isn't Genesis. It's in history. For 4,000 years, no rabbi, no Jewish sage, not Gamaliel, not Paul, no biblical writer, not even Jesus himself ever called Eden the fall. Each of them spoke of transgression, exile, and death, but not a fall of humanity. Then came the church fathers. Irenaeus, in the 2nd century, he framed Adam's act as humanity's descent into corruption. Tertullian, in the late 2nd to early 3rd century, he introduced the Latin word lapsus, which means a slip, to fall. Then Augustine, in the 4th to 5th century, he reframed Eden as the fall of man and taught that Adam's guilt was passed down to all humanity. He stated in City of God, Book 13, "For we all were in that one man, since we all were that one man who fell into sin through the woman who was made from him before the sin." That system became known as original sin. And from Augustine onward, the fall dominated Western Christianity, dominated our thoughts. But horizontal Bible reading shows us something far different. Adam transgressed and attracted sin. Cain opened the door and let sin in. Paul, he preserved this distinction. Christ came in, shut the door, and broke sin's power. So Eden wasn't the fall. It was humanity's first failure to Shema, to listen, to trust, to believe, and to act in harmony with the voice of God. And it was the moment sin came knocking at humanity's door, waiting for someone to answer. That just so happened to be Cain. If this changes how you see Eden, the book of Genesis, you'll love my book, God's Garden. In it, I take this same horizontal approach of Bible reading through Genesis and show you how the earliest chapters of the Bible reveal far more than we've been taught. And don't stop here. Watch my next video, The Lie Buried in Genesis, how biblical Hebrew changes everything. In it, I show how God never gave commands in the way we think. Once you see that, the story of Eden and the whole Bible will open up in ways you never imagined.